Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. I'd like to start tonight's event by acknowledging the Yagara and Turrbal people as the traditional custodians of the land on which I am on, and pay my deep respects to country and to elders past and present. Please take this moment to also acknowledge the unceded lands you're on, of which there are many, I'm sure, and these lands are steeped in history, creativity, and a long, long tradition of storytelling. And it always was, always will be Aboriginal land. My name's Bianca. I'm an events host for Avid Reader. Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's launch of Plum by Brendan Cowell. We probably all know a footy-loving man who has trouble expressing his thoughts and feelings, but could poetry be the answer? As Radio National Breakfast Fran Kelly says in his new novel, Plum, Brendan Cowell tackles family, concussions, masculinity, football, and the deep pain that some men feel but can't quite articulate. Tonight, Brendan is joined by ABC's national music correspondent, Zan Rowe. I will introduce you to our special guest very soon. Just a few points for housekeeping in the meantime. So the discussion for tonight's book launch will go for approximately 45 minutes with time for Q&A at the end. Please feel free to send your questions through at any time on the chat. I'll be sending through some helpful links to where you can purchase your copy of Plum tonight, so keep an eye out for that on the chat. And to minimize any disruptions, we ask that you remain on mute throughout tonight's event. If you do experience any tech difficulties and need to leave the room, you can just click the same link and you'll be able to, and I will let you back in again. Otherwise, please sit back, relax, pour yourself a glass of wine, hot chocolate, cup of tea, and enjoy. So I'll now introduce our guests. Brendan Cowell is an award-winning writer, actor, and director for television, theatre, and film. He wrote the smash hit Reuben Guthrie for Belvoir Street Theatre in 2009 and wrote and directed the film adaptation, winning an Augie for the screenplay. Brendan wrote 2 episodes of the multi-award-winning series, The Slap, for which he won the AACTA Best Screenplay Prize. He has been named the leading light amongst the playwrights of his generation and has won the Patrick White Playwrights Award, the Philip Parsons Young Playwrights Award, and the Griffin Award. His 11 plays have been produced all around the world. He was a writer on the acclaimed TV series Love My Way, in which he starred. Many of his episodes for Love My Way were nominated for Australian Writers Guild Awards for Outstanding Screenplay. Brendan is based between New Zealand, Sydney, and London. At the moment, he's coming from Sydney and yet remains a loyal Cronulla Sharks fan. Brendan's best-selling debut novel, How It Feels, was published by Pan Macmillan in 2010. And in conversation tonight with Brendan, we have Zan Rowe, who, as I mentioned, is ABC's national music correspondent and also host of Double J Mornings and the Take 5 podcast. She is co-host of the Bang On podcast with Miff Warhurst. And when not ruminating on music, she has contributed to anthologies Better Than Sex and Women of Letters, and talked film and television on ABC TV's Screen Time. So please give a very warm Avid Reader welcome to Brendan and Zan for this evening. And I will pass over to you, Zan. Thank you.
Thanks, Bianca. Hello, everyone. I'm coming to you from the beautiful lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation here in Naarm in Melbourne. And I also pay my respects to elders past and present and any Indigenous people who are in the Zoom tonight and on the lands that you gather in this beautiful country. It's such a joy to be with you on a Friday night. When I was asked to do this, I couldn't think of a better person to have a yarn with, because Brendan Cowell I've known for many, many years, and he's a fantastic storyteller, as you can probably see through his incredible CV. And of course, now with this new book, Plum, which is a ripping read and perfectly released in NRL Grand Final week. We'll get to that in just a moment. I definitely want to know who you're backing, Cowley. But first, tell us a little bit about the story of Peter Lum, or Plum. What made you want to tell his story?
Yeah, it's kind of there's a few approaches to answering that, but I was at an interesting position in my writing career, I guess. Last February, I was back in London and I had the hunger to write something, but I'd been working on Avatar in New Zealand. I had a bit of money and my acting career had been going quite well. And I'd had a couple of bad experiences with television and got a bit confused there. And I didn't have to take a writing job, is what I'm kind of saying. And so I thought I want to write, but I want to write really just for the sake of writing, and to write something that was very meaningful to me. I wanted to make art. I wanted to really connect with something, not for money, not for anything, and almost remind myself why I wrote. And that came back to poetry. I put on a night last year at the Giant Dwarf called Poems for Pause, where a bunch of Australian celebrities got up on a Thursday and Saturday and they recited an original poem. And it was a big hit. We made about $15,000 for Koala Hospital to support the bushfires. But what I was watching was I was reminded how beautiful it is to watch people recite a poem, no matter how good or bad the poem is. And that's how I started writing. I started writing poems when I was 12. And how I realised I was good at writing was performing them in pubs across Sydney and at Union. So I thought, you know what, poetry kind of saved me. Poetry kind of rescued me. And then I was kind of in a number of conversations, one with Merrick Watts, a good mate of mine. And I said, who's the last guy in Australia to have poetry rescue him and to actually discover a true talent for poetry, and almost be so embarrassed about it. It's like a coming out story, except he's not coming out to his homophobic mates as gay. He's coming out saying, I write poems, and that's when I came up with Peter the Plum Lum, this kind of bruised and battered ex-footy player who finds himself at a particular, fork in the road with his life, only ever knowing to never take a backward step, which his father Albert taught him. He now has to take a backward step, take a 180, breathe, and reassess the way he lives his life. And that's when concussion, the issue, was starting to build with Boyd Cordner and rugby union, AFL, and that all kind of fell into place. So that's how it kicked it off, Zan. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like a pretty timely novel to write because of that conversation that's rising, and not just about the effects of concussion, but more broadly the epidemic of unspoken about mental health in men in Australia. Like, it seems like there's so many different worlds that are culminating in one with this book. Did it feel, once you started to write about it and to see what the kind of conversations that were getting louder, that it all fit kind of perfectly for you? How long did it take for you to get to that point, to tell all of this story that captured all these things that you knew, and it sounds like all these things you wanted to explore as well?
Yeah, well, I mean, you have a lot of ideas as a writer. You have a few a day. Well, I do. But rarely do they move forward and start to inform you and start to tell you, we're onto something here, buddy. And with Plum, it just started coming to life, especially in the news, but also within myself, and everything that seemed to happen to me and all the conversations I was having just seemed to suggest that this was a book not only that needed to be written, but I needed to write. Lockdown suddenly happened in London. I was going to be there for 4 or 5 months. I lived in a dark basement flat with mice. I was unwell and heartbroken, and Peter Lum held my hand just as much as I held his. And I kind of needed him for my own mental health. And I fell in love with him. And I cried a lot during the writing of this book. I just found it so moving, and that this guy was just out of his depth. He was a good guy. And this book is a radical book about kindness. Everybody in this book is kind, but they don't always behave in kind ways because they don't have the emotional language to deal with the shit that's coming at them. They don't know what they're in for. So they get confused and they lash out. And also Peter Lum, he struggles to share. He can't tell Charmaine and Gavin his son that he's got a brain injury, a degenerative brain injury. He's too embarrassed. He's also scared that all the fun's going to go from life. You know, how do you have fun without getting smashed? How do you have fun without going hard in the surf, going hard at the gym? Like, what is the point of living if you can't go through a fucking brick wall with everything, you know? And that's all he's known. So he has to discover a new type of joy. And that's when these characters come in. But I felt like, you know, with this book, it started to talk to me, and I started to see that it could actually be quite important. But it took me probably 3 months to map it out in my basement flat. And once I get it, I write quite quickly. So I probably wrote it in about 6 or 7 weeks.
Wow.
But I got up every morning, I did my Zoom boxing, and then I wrote from 10 till 6 with a little walk to the shops and back, trying not to get the virus. You know, and when I write, I go, because the words part for me is easy. I love the words part. I love the dialogue part. What's hard for me and what I'm getting better at is the craft of storytelling and issuing the themes and distributing plot. And that's, so I sculpted that really finitely, because, you know, I made a lot of changes in my life over the last few years. And so I helped Peter make some changes in his life, but he helped me be brave to write it because he is brave, you know. So we kind of taught each other stuff.
Do you know any Peter Lums? Is there a bit of you in Peter Lum?
Oh, absolutely. And I think, you know, he's a poet. He's a softie. He cares too much, you know, and Peter Lum, he doesn't like being famous. He doesn't like being recognised. And I've always had issues with being recognised, you know, not that I'm proper famous like Reese Witherspoon or Beyonce or something, but, you know, when I was at the peak of my B+ stardom with Love My Way, or when I had a famous girlfriend and stuff, I found it quite hard. I like my family, my friends, and my little way of going about life. I don't want to be out there. But you later find out that the reason why Peter Lum fears people and wants to be anonymous is that he can't remember anything, and he doesn't want to embarrass himself because he doesn't always know the right thing to say because his brain's giving way. But in these seizures and concussions, there's a very much a return to innocence. And so, and that's what I felt too, you know, and Peter Lum's very much reminded of his childhood and having to reckon with this stuff. But Peter Lum's my uncles, he's footy players that coach me, he's guys at the pub. I've met so many football players over the last 15 years, interviewing them and hanging out with them because I'm deeply embedded in the rugby league world. And so he's a culmination of all those guys I grew up with, my dad's mates, my uncles and guys at the pub, just kind of put into one big, kind, warm idiot, you know, that is Peter Lum.
Did you consult with any particular rugby players to actually get that, you know, that insider league intelligence to tell the story of this character?
Well, I feel like, I mean, I watch 16 hours of rugby league on a weekend, you know, so, and I have done for a very long time. So, and I tried to act and write like rugby league players play, you know, with brutality and grace, you know, but I try to leave nothing behind as well, nothing in the tank. But I didn't have to research the rugby league part at all, but I was really interested in the notion of a second go at life. And what happens to players who from 4 to 34, their body has had this single purpose. And also they rarely know how to go to the post office and stuff because everything's taken care of them. They have recess, they get fed, they wash, they shower, go back to the gym, weights, ball movement, go home, play Nintendo, eat a Subway, go to bed, come back the next morning. And so they don't really know how to be in the world, professional sportsmen. So what do they do at 38 or 45 when the kids are grown up and the body starts to give way and they don't know anything else? And I spoke to a lot of athletes and footy players about that, and specifically about seizures and concussion. I spoke to the 8th Immortal, Andrew Johns, who's a great friend of mine, and 2 or 3 other football players that I haven't mentioned. But especially Joey was so erudite and generous as to what those seizures were like. And I think it was quite cathartic for him because we had many 3-hour chats that I recorded, and I would then scribe out. And so everything that's in the book about seizures, concussions, and all the meetings with the neurologists and neuroscientists are, taken from verbatim interviews, because I don't have the right to get that stuff wrong,
Did you come away from those conversations viewing rugby league in a very different way, being a lifelong fan?
Yeah, it's terrifying. And I think there's a deal with the devil that you make when you go to play what I don't think is a contact sport. It's a collision sport, isn't it? Like, you see a man running at you, you run at him. It's two trucks hitting each other at 47 kilometres an hour, apparently. That's why when I turned 16 and the boys came back from Christmas and I turned around and went, holy shit, Ivan's got big. I thought, I'm going to the emotional pain of the arts and leaving the physical pain of rugby league behind, because the dudes just suddenly came back with moustaches and they were fucking enormous. And these guys are so tough. And that's kind of why the plot line of Gavin is in there. He's this sweet boy that just wants to be like his dad, and he's talented. But what does Peter do now with the knowledge that, they say even before you turn pro, you've had 1,200 knocks, because it's not the big knocks, it's just the little jolts. It's just those little impact ones of training. It's the headers at soccer. You know what I mean? It's all those little jolts that rattle the brain that is like a plum in a jar. It's a soft plum in a jar, And, James Graham, the great English football player, said, I knew all along. I sacrificed my family. Maybe one day I won't remember their names. And to play the way he played, he made a deal. It happens in arts and theatre and poetry in its own way, where, me saying to my dad, I'll never have a real job, where I'll go out and perform Hamlet and someone can give me 2 stars and say it's awful. And then I can do a great job and never work for 18 months. And the judgment, the ups, the downs, the disappointments, the emptiness, the joy, everyone thinks you're amazing, it's over. And so there's, in everything we do, in sport and art, there is the ego, there is the godlike quality, then the letdown. And so once I put those worlds together, they both seem quite similar in a way, which helped me explore and almost suggest there needs to be a moratorium on the two notions of the Australian male, the sensitive poet writing, scarf wearing, effeminate guy, and the beer swilling, pie eating thug, and Peter Lum kind of becomes both. And I'm both, so that was kind of what the book ended up suggesting, is that perhaps there is a poet and a brute in all of us, and that's okay. It's what we do with it, and then Peter Lum realizes he now has a choice in his behavior.
Well, this is what I see in reading this book, because we know each other. We've known each other for some years, and I'm not a massive rugby league fan, but you make me interested in rugby league. So 10 points for that, Cowley.
Thank you. A lot of female readers have said, I wanted more league stuff, more of the banging and the smashing, because I was very wary of that, because a couple of the responses were, has Brendan Cowell written a sports book? Like, no, it's not a sports book at all.
No, it gave me a really interesting insight, because it's purely geography. I grew up in Melbourne and, grew up in Essendon. So I've always been an AFL fan. It's not for lack of wanting. It's just, pure chance. But I'm interested in those two sides of you, and particularly in the poetry side, which is so rich in this book. I want to get to some of the characters that wind their way through this book as well that surprise you. But poetry is obviously a huge part and an anchor in this book, and a really beautiful opening up and realization of Plum's character and the worlds that he steps into. How big was poetry in your life as a kid, as a teenager, as an adult? At what point did you connect with poetry?
Yeah, well, it wasn't like I was studying sonnets and hiding away in a cave reading E.E. Cummings or anything like that. It wasn't anything that interesting. I just started writing stuff down. I started scribbling little thoughts. And I remember my first poem, I think I showed Mum or something, which was Staring at Puddles. And it was just this poem of, I was staring at a puddle, probably like Narcissus, I guess, as a child, but I was like, here I am staring at puddles. Don't know why I'm staring at puddles. I could spend my life staring at puddles, my face in the rain, staring at puddles. And I was like 12 and I just read it out. So there's something good about it, you know, and something felt right about it and something made sense. And I did feel like a bit of an oddball at Caringbah de la Salle and Fatima. Like it was a sporty, surfy school. And I was a weird theatre kid, you know, and I started reading the poems at assembly, which didn't help me in the bullying realms. And I was theatrical. And at home with Mum and everything, it was it was an arts festival in the house because my sister was a ballerina, my other sister's singer, dancer. Mum's very eccentric. And so at home, it was like put on a show. But outside in the Shire, it wasn't really like that. So I had to shut the show down outside the house. So poetry was my little private way of the tough stuff of life and the bullying, the estrangement, family things that happened. It just started to be my little mate. And I wrote a lot of them. And when I got into my 20s, I was an actor. I didn't think I was a writer because I thought you had to be fully smart and intelligent to be a writer. But I realized I had 120 moleskin books of poems and ideas and sketches, and Mum still finds them. I still dig them up. I'm like, there's 60 poems in here, you know? And so when I became a writer, I realized I was a writer. I just didn't think I was allowed. But I realized I had a voice through reciting poetry. You know, Tug Dudley had this night at the Friend at Hand, word of mouth, when I came out of uni, and I won that a few times. Then I did like 1 hour gigs to 100 people in a pub, and it was good. And that's what gave me the confidence to write a play. Because I thought if you can hold a room with the world's most unpopular art form, poetry, then fuck, I could do anything, you know. And it was just the love of language. I loved the rhythm of words. You know, there was something about the way the words danced together, and I could have fun with words, and I could listen to people talk on the bus, truck drivers, teachers, the way people's language is stunted and muted and what that means. So it was very much the Australian vernacular and almost the failure to express yourself that became the way I wrote.
Well, with that in mind, there's, as I said, beautiful poetry that winds its way through Plum and written by several characters. But I'd love to hear a poem that you've written for this book in, I think it's Plum's voice, isn't it? Is that the one that you want to read?
Yeah, I've just tried to find one that doesn't give the story away too much for
No
those that haven't finished the book. So this is just a poem that I'd started writing for me, and then when I was writing the book, I thought, I reckon Plum could well recite this one. So I apologise that I'm not Peter Lum, because I think people should read their own poems out, but he is currently unavailable, which the book will reveal why. And yeah, a certain poet moves in with Peter Lum and they cohabitate for a couple of weeks, and they do a bit of inventory. They write letters to their dads and their partners, and they don't send them. And he kind of gets a therapy lesson of, you know, because my thought when I wrote How It Feels, it was about men should speak. Then I realized men will never speak. So Plum is men should write shit down. That's my new angle on males expressing themselves.
One step at a time.
Yeah, exactly. They're never going to say it. They're just going to talk about footy players' ankle injuries and renovations and, you know, 12-hour slow roasted lamb. So Peter Lum goes to the lighthouse with a certain woman, and he reads out a poem on the theme of appetite. This is a letter to my mouth by Peter Lum. Mouth, it's me, Pete. Are you free? Can we speak? Sorry, of course you can speak. You are my mouth. It is your job, week on week. And while I am here, I'll say thank you, larynx, thank you, teeth. Shout out to my cheeks and tongue, but today I'm talking mouth because, to be honest, it's the one. I guess, in this time of poetic isolation, I've been doing this thing called contemplation with this chick, Sylvia, red hot writer sensation. And so in her American terms, I've been unpacking all my stuff. And what's come up mostly is that being you, mouth, historically, honestly, must be pretty fucking rough. Mouth, my mouth, you soft, moist pillow bench, you wide open, avaricious, fussy, not fussy, munching suck garage, your curvy, luscious bend. It's me here, Peter, and I'm keen to make amends. When I was a kid, I made concoctions swallowed for ritualistic indoctrinations into clubs and private groups that no one wanted to join, called like Peter's Club. I'd stir up Vegemite and plums and glue and soy sauce and some of my sister's hair, grass, dirt, and bits of rubber into your mouth. Don't care. Mouth, for this I am sorry. Sorry, mouth. I'm sorry for the 30 years of binge drinking. Whiskey to beer, back to whiskey, margarita, fried chicken, cigarette, back to beer, wine, vodka, champagne, margarita, vomit in the pot plant, put it in again, vomit in the alleyway, tongue down a throat, make room, repeat. Mostly I'm sorry, hence the dread. Mostly I lie awake at night thinking of the things mouth said. You're a fucking shit of a mum. And Dad, don't even bother, Dad. I don't ever want to see you again, Dad. And ex-wife, I can't even write down. Fuck, I miss her mouth. Charmaine, the pain. If only I used you and explained. I love you, mouth. And I see you, mouth. And I promise from here on in, I shall listen before I spout or treat you like a bin. So let us say this one word prayer together and within it drop the fight. 1, 2, 3, before and after me. Let us scream for appetite.
One of many fantastic poems you can read by Brendan Cowell in the voice of Plum, in the voice of Bridget, in the voice of other characters in this wonderful second book. There are a few poets that make their visits to Peter Lum throughout this book. I don't know if we want to spoil by saying who. You mentioned Sylvia there. Can you guess who it is? There's a Walt, there's a Charles, there's a Jack, and there's an Emily. I'll leave it to you whether you want to give away their surnames, but this is part of the swirling mind mess that is Peter Lum's brain as he figures out what the hell's happening to him. Why did those particular characters visit Plum? Why did you choose those poets?
I only had one. I've read so much Bukowski, and even though he is an alcoholic misogynist, he explains America really well and how I feel sometimes really well and what the world's like. And, you know, some of those poems like The Shoelace, you know, it's not the big things that kill you, it's the shoelace that snaps. And, you know, he kills me, Bukowski. And when I was in LA, I tried to go to every bar he spoke about in Women and Ham on Rye. And so I had a sense that Bukowski might be in the book. And then suddenly when Peter's, you know, in a certain bar in Parramatta because he's left a certain footy game because he couldn't take it, you know, Bukowski just walked into the book, you know, and went, "Hey, cock," and that's when the book went whack. It just went, all bets are off now. Anything's possible. It's wide open, and it made me think, do you know what? Like with the seizures and concussions, there's such a return to innocence. You know, there's this kind of wanting to be held in the dark by your mum. There's angels and organs singing. There's something deep, angelic in the coming from deep within the earth in these epileptic fits and seizures that I've been told of. And also you're half dead. So the corridors of the brain are open and the afterlife is welcome. Suddenly anyone can come in and talk to you. And suddenly these poets were like these on-earth limbo helpers that come to people in this state and say, I'm going to give you a little bit of poetry to go and heal some of your relationships right now, brother. I blame Catherine Milne, the publisher of Plum, for Walt Whitman. I wasn't as familiar with his work, but she gave me Leaves of Grass as soon as we started working together. And that notion of all-encompassing, you are everything. You are love. You are the grass beneath your feet. Embrace suddenly really helped Plum, especially when once again he's running away from everything, this time to Thailand. Go back, embrace, be love, be family, be your son. You are your son and you are your father. You are everything. And I won't spoil about why the others come in, because it's a crucial positions. Kerouac, I had my huge beat poetry phase, and Ginsberg and Kerouac, and his tips for writers are just so amazing. So he kind of gives them to Plum at a certain point. And that's about as much as I'll say, actually, because they're kind of cherished moments for me in the book as to when those poets roll into town. But Bukowski kind of helps him when he's down and out. Then when he starts having issues with his dad and with chicks, he's like, you got to meet my friend Sylvia. I'm out of here. And a few people have said to me, I thought it might be a bit naff, this idea, but it's so normal and boring how the poets come into his life. It's really lo-fi, because he doesn't fucking know who they are. And he kind of knows something weird's going on, but they just come in and start talking to him. And so it's very banal, the way they're imposed on him. It's not, it is magic realism, but it's not, through some kind of, you know what I mean?
There's no big puff of smoke and then they appear.
No.
If you actually, there's the way that it's written, you do sort of have to check yourself. And once you realize, oh, it's that person, you realize it's not actually necessarily reality. And this again, what's happening to his brain is what's causing this, what he's seeing that other people don't.
I paraphrased a lot of my favorite poems of theirs and a lot of their favorite lines into dialogue. So that's where I kind of cheated, where I got to put a lot of their sentiment, that Sylvia has with daddy stuff and Bukowski has with the shoelace. So I rewrote it and kind of mangled it in there. So their poetry...
Just a bit of plagiarism to, flesh out the word count. Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah, someone borrows geniuses steal, or who said that? Someone
something
said
like that. Art is just stealing other people's ideas and making them better, right?
Exactly. Lucky this isn't being recorded on the
all of a sudden you're having to pay a lot of royalties.
Yeah.
While I was reading this, and with those moments, but with so many of the moments and the scenes in this book, it's very visual, and you have a huge career in writing for television, for the screen, for the stage, for the big screen. I wonder whether that impacts your writing, given your first book was in 2010, well into your career as an actor and a playwright, or whether you're conscious of that, because to me, your writing feels very visual. I can see it adapted immediately as I read the words in Plum.
Yeah, I mean, I read a lot of books, and I read a lot of books that I can tell the authors like, geez, I hope they pick this up and make a TV show out of it.
What, like Leanne Moriarty?
Not saying nothing, but I try to write a novel for a novel, and this was a TV idea called Impact Player, but it was about a footy player that kind of gets into the poetry scene and starts hanging out with poets. And I nearly had some luck with that as a TV idea, but something in me strongly said, don't go there. And then I went to London and I benched it. And then I was in a conversation with a friend over there, and she said, it's your second book. And then COVID happened, and I went, well, that seems like it's meant to be, because the whole dance of my career stopped, pause. And I went, I'm a novelist now. Let's go. Let's do Plum. Let's find him. And I was allowed to make it literary, and I was allowed to find the layers of it that I couldn't probably do in a television script. This demanded to be a book. And I don't care if it's nothing but a book, because I love this book and I love this man, and I just love hearing from people who've read it. I love ringing them up and go and tell me, and it's I think it's a book about connection, so that's why I hope we can get out in time and it can connect with bookstores and people, because I think it can help. I think it's a book about the bravery of connection.
Absolutely. Yeah. For me, as a non-rugby league loving person, I loved this book. I also loved all the characters that fleshed it out. You've got Plum's core crew, who are as emotionally stunted as he are. They're also ex-athletes, an ex-jockey, an ex-league player. But then you have these incredible characters that drift in and out of his life, like Trent and Father Pepple and Chloe and Bridget. How did those characters come to mind? Did you need to find people who would rip him out of his comfort zone because he was never going to get out of it with those mates that he'd had for years?
Yeah, and until you're open, a lot of people that could have helped you on your journey have come into your life, but you've walked right past them or you haven't heard a word they've said, because people are always helping you, but they sound like madmen until you're ready. But when you're willing, suddenly everybody sounds like a philosopher, because your ears are open and your heart's open and you're ready to be intimate with people, and he's ready to be intimate with people and say, I'm in the present, what's happening. And he, after a certain suicide attempt, a guy gives him a job at a pub and there's a poetry night, and a British woman with a disability gets up and does a poem called Swap With Me, I'll Swap With You, about how we all share the same amount of pain. Tears flood down his face. And then later on that night, she gives him a poetry book, and there's a friendship that might be there. He doesn't do friends with women. There's a Nigerian priest who's also coaches boys in UFC, who's in AA recovery, who comes into his life. And for some reason, he keeps wanting to hang out with him. He doesn't know why. And there's Chloe. And in the original idea, I always imagined he'd coach a team. I've got a deep fantasy to play a coach one day. I really want to play a coach who just gives the wrong advice, but somehow they win. And so he's walking past an innocuous field one day, and he sees a Polynesian teenage girl kicking a ball, and she's bloody hopeless, but it's her commitment and the way she beats herself up that just brings him to tears, and he writes his first poem. And then he just wants to go find her and help her. She has no idea who he is. So he kind of develops this weird little friendship with her, and also a guy having issues with his gender at the pub. And so he starts being important to other people. And these are people that he would never hang with, because they're not punting, drinking blokes like the Coxless Four, his group of mates. But he's open to them suddenly because he's changing, and change don't hurt. It's just the resistance to change that hurts. And when Peter Lum opens the floodgates, suddenly all the weirdos can come in. And that's what happens. When you're ready to be intimate, the world floods in, and it's an amazing place to be, and suddenly you don't need the piss and the punt and all that other stuff because you're present.
And this is where the growth happens. It's beautiful to see it unravel. Yeah. It is painfully slow in parts though, Cowley. There's bits where he's kind of like 1 foot forward and 2 steps back, and you're like, come on, Plum, just help yourself. But it feels so painfully true as to how so many men that I know are so resistant to that. It's not an overnight realization, is it? It's quite honest with the way that Australian masculinity really represents, to me anyway, and I'm sure to you.
Yeah, I mean, there's 45 years of doing it one way. Since he was 5 years old, he's done it one way. So even when you have an intellectual decision, you've got to wait for your body and your instincts to follow, and he's worried about what everyone will think. He's worried about what his life will be. But in the end, he can't keep running, because that's what his dad did. And that's what it comes down to, is that age-old tale of the sins of the father, and it's about Plum going, fuck, I've got to turn up. I've got to stop running. I've got to turn up. And that's the thing that really, you know, all the helps and all the quotes and all the poems in the world, but there's something deep within him that has to win that challenge with himself, which is to not run. And to turn up takes a lot of strength. You got to look deep within, you know, and that's his kind of journey. And it's very funny watching a man change. You know, it's ridiculous because he's a grown man. He can do anything. He's an immortal football player. You know, he's a god. He's a genius. But he can't do the simple human stuff. But you know, he may or may not get there.
We're going to get to some of your questions in a moment. If you've got any that you're thinking of while we're chatting, please pop them in the chat and we'll get to them in a couple of minutes. I wanted to ask you really quickly, though, before we wrap up our conversation, Brendan, about the other big character of this book, which is Cronulla. I'm so astounded to know that you wrote this all in that basement in London because it's so beautiful.
You've been in that basement in London.
I have been in that basement and it is absolutely as dank as you described. But I'm so glad you're out of there and back in the sunshine of Australia.
Thank you.
But it's such a big character in this book, you know, and I know you grew up in the Shire, but you paint it so beautifully. You know, there's one scene in particular where you're talking about this energy on New Year's Eve just building. It's so visceral. I can feel it. I felt nervous reading that passage, like, oh, I know what's coming. How much of it came from memory? Were you able to write it all from memory? Did you have to fill in some bits when you came back to Australia? Like, how did it all play out?
Yeah, I mean, the fact is he lived in Cronulla, wasn't the aim, but I've written 2 books, Cronulla now, and I've got a 3rd book coming, and he may as well be from Cronulla as well, I guess, for my Cronulla trilogy. And then I'm never going to write about Cronulla ever again, I swear. But yeah, I think a lot of people from the Shire who are quite proud of being from the Shire. There's 87 Shires in the country, but we only know about one, you know, because the Sutherland Shire is the Shire.
God's country.
It is God's country, and, you know, for certain reasons gets a pretty bad name, and so it should for those reasons. But my experience of it was the opposite. And, you know, my best mates are still my best mates from there. And I've got a lot of family down there, and there's a real beautiful simplicity to it, and a real family basis, and a real loyalty, unsaid loyalty that goes on there. So I'm hoping everyone from the Shire, you know, it's almost like you could get a shuttle bus and do a Plum tour. And growing up, you know, Shark Park was the Mecca. It was the church. It was the place you wanted to go to, and the football players were the heroes. And it's also a place where, you know, if you are a footy player, you're famous in Cronulla, and everyone stops and just goes like that when you walk past, you know, and that was our experience as well. And, you know, we had with Dan Staines, one of the Cronulla players. He used to clean our pool, you know, and we'd sit there and go, Dan Staines is cleaning our pool. I think my sister, who might even be on this call, she was dating a couple of the footy players. Like, geez, my sister's dating one of the Sharks, you know. But, you know, Cronulla got to 1957 and went, this will do us. This is a great year. Let's pause, you know, in all senses. And it's magic down there. It's absolute utopia. And perhaps that's, you know, what builds the stuff out of there, because there's, you know, I remember our neighbours, the Callsleys, like, they had 3 different types of Sigmas in their driveway, but they hadn't been over Tom Ugly's bridge. They were in their 70s, you know, and they hadn't left the Shire. And I was like, what do you mean? I've been to Paddington, you know, and they're
Wow.
like, why would you leave the Shire? It's all here. And they thought I was crazy, you know, and that's all my friends from school still send me a DM going, hey, BC, still in the Shire? I'm like, good on you. Also, you know, as I've said before in interviews, radical thinkers down there, because they're not caught up in the puzzle of political correctness like we all are in the cities, trying to not offend each other. They don't give a fuck, you know, so they'll think what they want about everything. And that's what's great to be around. Until late in the night, where a couple of the opinions get a little, you know, murky, but have to get out of there. But yeah, I'm proud to be from Cronulla.
I really want to go to that open night poetry night that features in the book. I'm not sure if it's based on anything, but it sounds like a
we
wider.
should start it if it doesn't exist.
Let's start it. Let's start it. I want to throw open to some questions from you who are listening in the Zoom, and I might just pass over back to Bianca, who's going to, I think, read out some of those questions on people's behalf. I'm not sure how it works. Over to you, Bianca.
Yeah. So I'll field the questions and I'll read them out to you, Brendan, for your once you're ready. But yeah, I just want to say thank you so much. This has been a really fascinating discussion and I've been very entertained. The poem was so thank you. Let's have a look. So we had a question. I'm going to just say it verbatim. I want to know exactly how much fun you had narrating the audiobook.
Well, it's funny because after you edit your novel, and I edited my novel with the incredibly clever Madeline James, and you kind of hate your editor because they keep picking you up on tiny inconsistencies, but every fourth one you go, oh wow, thank God that you picked me up on that. That would have been embarrassing, but after the edit, most novelists don't ever want to read their book again because you go through every line and you kind of argue every semicolon, and you see how many times you use the word despite something, or and after I finished the edit, I had to go into a booth for 2 weeks and read my book out. So if I wasn't already going mad in Plumland, but being an actor and having the ego the size of mine, I wasn't going to let anybody else do it. And I figured, I'm from there, and I do know how to do Charles Bukowski's voice. So I did have a lot of fun, but at the same time, I didn't want it to end up being too silly. But the guy in the booth, he was quite good actually. And he was quite an unemotional man, like a sound dude, But I remember when I was reading out the bit where Pete is lying in the water, wondering what to think, and he's wondering what other men think and what you should think. And he's starting to realize he loves his brain, but he's battered his brain his whole life. And he's like, I really want to look after my brain. I love my brain. And I looked over and the sound technician's like, like this. And I'm like, you're all right. He goes, yeah, that just got me that bit. Like this. And I thought, God, if I can get the sound, dude, this book might be all right, But yeah, no, I loved it. But it's I could only do 4 hours a day because it's quite intense.
4 hours is intense, definitely in itself.
Yeah.
So we have another question. This person says, really looking forward to starting the book. Have loved listening to you talk about it tonight. You referenced starting it in lockdown in London in that dark, dank basement, and had made some changes in your own life. Having made a ton myself this year, do you feel that without the changes, Plum would not have come at the time it did, as well as the shutdown of the pandemic?
1,000%.
Yeah.
1,000%. And excellent question. And congratulations to you for whatever changes you make, because it's not easy. But yeah, I kind of cleaned up my life and faced the devil a little bit and did what I kind of always had to do. And, I did what I did and it was hard. And I said to Plum, who would be even harder for, you can do it, So I kind of pushed him in a direction. And the book is about what I learned, but it's in a narrative about a 49-year-old ex-footy player. Maybe, as Zan said, is there a little bit of Peter Lum? I'd say maybe there's a fantasy that I could have been Peter Lum that's probably in there. I wish I was a big, amazing footy player, but I'm not. Yeah.
And what are you reading currently? I guess, if each of you wanted to respond to this question, you're more than welcome to. And any book recommendations, that's the 2-in-1 question there.
Yeah, I read a cool South African book called The Promise. I read this Melbourne book, Everything in Its Right Place by Tobias McCorkle.
Yep.
Fucking great book, that. I just read I Shot the Devil by Ruth McIver because someone sent it to me. I read Nothing But My Body by Tilly Lawless, the sex worker, and I've just reading a very unknown Irish writer called Sally Rooney at the moment, just because I'm trying to be supportive. And her new book. Are you reading that as well, Zan?
Yeah, I am. I actually put it down so I could read your book in preparation for this. So we're on the same page.
And that will reflect the sales.
I think that a lot of people are probably reading that book. I was floored by how many people the weekend it came out had just zipped through it, but I'm taking it a bit more slowly. I'm also reading a book that came out a few years ago, Robert McFarlane's Landmarks, amazing nature writer, glossaries of incredible dictionaries of words about nature. Anyway, I've been, as many people in lockdown, fully engaging with the natural world and just wanting to really get into that with my reading as well. So they're the two books I'm reading, as well as Plum at the moment.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Sorry, I'm just kind of trying to half read a question just to make sure I get the essence of it as well. So the next question we've had said, thanks everyone. I can't wait to read the book when it arrives. Last time I caught up with NRL Sharks players was before the Origin game at the MCG a few years back. One of the guest speakers was the great Birdman. He seemed almost unaffected by the massive media exposure and controversy after his dramas in 2008. Are footy players heavily protected from the media and exposure, hugely thick-skinned, or is it a learnt diversion? Thanks again. Hope you made it to the GF in 2016. So I'm just going to put that over to you as a bit of probably an
You're a bit lost on that one,
there.
Bianca.
Yeah.
You'd be a Broncos fan, though, I assume. You scream Broncos. You're not,
person.
right?
No, but I am definitely relating
sense
to this story and this book, and I'm going to listen to the audiobook or grab a copy at my next time I visit Avid.
I guess answering that question, you probably have to, without being deflecting, I probably have to ask a footy player. I mean, I've got no idea what happens in those media. I mean, Zan, you're in the media, but I know they get media trained to say as little as possible. That's all why they all say, we're taking it one game at a time, put 100% on the day, and, shout out to the boys, full credit to the boys. We're just, we'll concentrate on the semis if we make it. And until then, we're just going out there to play football for us. We're not thinking about the other team. We're just playing for us. And they say the same 6 things to any question. So, but, I had a couple of big nights with Greg Bird, and he's incorrigible.
I feel as though I cannot at all speak on behalf of sports people, but there was an amazing moment where, I don't know if anybody watches Ted Lasso, but Roy Kent in a recent episode was sitting on the panel, and he basically just walked off because he realized that all the people on the panel were talking about was anticipating what the players were thinking or doing and then ripping them apart when they didn't deliver on that. And I thought that captured perfectly why sports people don't speak about what they're doing, because unless you've ever been out there, no one can predict to the nth degree what's going to happen. So why would you ever put a quote out to suggest that you knew what you were doing 100% only to be ripped to shreds? You got to protect yourself, right? It's hard. Like, the 24-hour media cycle is hard for everyone, including sports people, but some people are better media trained than others, I would say.
So I'll read out the next question we've got here. So someone's just said, Rosie's husband, Kira wee boy, about to be a dad to a boy. What advice would you have to balancing all that is fun about the rough and tumble of masculinity while embracing the more emotional side, which is something Australian masculinity doesn't do well?
Well, I'm not a father, so I don't have any real dad advice. But all I would say about is about boys is, boys are quite sweet till they get confused. And I guess stay on the level with them and listen, you know what I mean? And you don't have to solve a kid's problems, but you just have to acknowledge the feeling that they're having. When a kid goes, I'm feeling this, you just go, hey, what's that like? And just be present. And a kid will take you, a boy will take you on an adventure. You've just got to listen and be there with it, and then they'll eventually work it out for themselves. But what an exciting adventure to go on. And, I guess Gavin would say, don't hide from me, don't lie to me. And, dads are heroes till the boys about 12 or 13. You know, you're just like, Dad, watch this. I'm going to throw it over there. Dad, I put that over. Dad, watch this. Dad, watch this. And you do that till you're 12 or 13. And then you're looking at your guy going, geez, Dad's a bit weird, isn't he? Dad drinks too much. Dad farted. Dad's human. You know what I mean? So enjoy the 12 years of being a hero, because after that you'll be, analysed, I guess.
Love
advice from the actor.
Love the advice. Excellent. Another question was, and this is a good one too, what was the difference between writing this book and your first book? Was it harder or easier?
This book was kind of harder work, but a much more pleasant experience. I nearly had a couple of nervous breakdowns with how it feels, and I kind of overthought it and built it up, and with this book, I took it slowly. And like I said, I mapped it out. And I think I grew up a bit before I wrote this book. And my life was a bit of a calamity when I wrote How It Feels. And I think what was in How It Feels, I was still really, really angry about, which is the boys that died, and what, suicide, the role suicide played in the Sutherland Shire, and I lost a couple of neighbours. I lost a couple of mates. I lost my best mate. He took his own life. So I'd come out of a long relationship when I wrote it, and I was fucking furious that my mates were dead in the Sutherland Shire. So I think there was a lot of rage in it, and I wasn't in the best place to write it. But that's why I think some of the writing's great, because it came from a real place of soreness. But with Plum, I was fascinated about someone else and about concussion, and I wanted a book that was about kindness and connection. So there was something a little kind of around the same territory, but maybe me returning to it with 11 years life experience, and maybe a tiny bit of evolution.
Yeah. Thank you so much. That's all the questions we've received. And
can I ask one more question really quickly, Bianca?
Yeah,
it's a really important one. I need to know who you're going for, the Rabbitohs or the Panthers?
Critical question.
Well, yeah, Sharks aren't playing, but I think the Rabbitohs will finally miss Latrell Mitchell in the final, that knockout punch that incredible athlete delivers. So I think Panthers 30-20. Man of the match, Isaiah Yeo.
Look at you with the stats.
Go and put all your money on Sportsbet right now.
Do not encourage gambling, Cowley.
Yeah. Gamble irresponsibly.
We just edit that out later. No, I'm kidding.
Who have you got, Zan?
Oh, I guess I'm going for the Rabbitohs, because I lived in Redfern for 5 years, so I'm going for the Rabbitohs.
I'm going for the Rabbitohs in here, but I think the Panthers will win. Yeah.
Good.
Glory.
And just to finish off, I always like to ask, because I know there's a huge, that amount of time between sending it off, getting through the editing phase, finalizing that, going off to, the printers with the book, and there's there's the audiobook narration in between that's been happening. But what are you focusing on now? What's next for you, Brendan?
Well, I just took September off, actually. I didn't do anything. In saying that, I've been talking a lot about the book, which is awesome. And shout out to Tom Saras, who's in the room right now, for getting me on all the Zooms and the podcasts. And we've got a good little team with HarperCollins. You got no idea, because I'm in the cave. I don't know if anyone's hearing. I feel like the book exists, but it wasn't like the first time where I was in Noosa at a book club and in Queensland and going on youth radio in Melbourne, and all that amazing connection you have with booksellers and book clubs. So hopefully we get a bit of that. But I'm about to go back. I wrote a little TV show in New Zealand last year when I was shooting Avatar, and Amazon just bought that. And I've got another little TV show that I'm going to start work on. So go back into TV land a bit. And I've also got an acting role in a Foxtel drama about a jury called The 12, based on the Belgian show that my mum's seen, haven't you, Bonnie? So they're adapting that So I'm gonna act in that and play another dodgy bastard on Australian television. Because God knows I haven't played enough of those.
Typecast.
Yeah, that's right. When am I going to get that Jude Law in a suit, handsome guy that walks through the big doors and like everybody stands up? I'm always like the shifty guy in the TAB. You know, I don't know what it is. One day.
Bukowski one day.
Yeah,
He's definitely the shifty guy.
Yeah.
Well, we have come to time. Unfortunately, I wish, as one of our attendees tonight has said, thank you so much for an entertaining interview.
Thanks for coming in.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. It has been most, I have to say, what a dynamic duo you make, because it's really hard on Zoom sometimes to sort of push that energy through the screen. But, you know, I hope everyone's been as entertained as I have. And it's been a really, really good discussion. Thank you so much for sharing that poem and your insights as well into the, I particularly enjoyed the process of your writing and everything that came
Bianca. Thanks
with
for
the
hosting.
book. And next time, for whatever comes next, for the next book, we would definitely welcome you to come up to spend the evening on the deck, back deck at Avid Reader.
Love that.
Right.
Yeah, I'll be there for sure. Thanks so much, Bianca. Thanks, Zan. You are the greatest. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. And,
go out with a big virtual.
Yeah.
Go out with a big virtual round of applause. Grab your copy of Plum.
I can do one of these digital reactions in my.
You can. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So tech savvy, Cowley. I love it.
I know, right?
Very impressive.
There's the cover. You know what to look for, and it is available in store at Avid Reader or online. So please make your purchase. Also, we do recommend if you are in Melbourne or Sydney at the moment, please support your independent local bookshops as well. We have Love Your Bookshop Day coming up on October 9. So we look forward to joining you for more events in the future with Avid Reader as well. Have a great evening, everyone. Thanks again. Good night.
Thanks, Bianca. Thanks,
Wonderful
everyone.
to meet you all.